All right. Well, today, sorry, my name is Samantha. And what was your name again?
Mariana.
Hi, Mariana.
Good to meet you, Sam.
Good. Well, today we're kind of going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be asking you a bunch of questions kind of about yourself and your childhood and
Okay.
kind of get an idea of how you grew up, essentially.
Gotcha.
Now, of course, anything that really happens in here is going to stay in here because I want to make sure that you're comfortable
Sure.
with what you talk about and that you're safe to talk about it.
Sure.
The only reason I would really break that confidentiality is just for a few reasons. If I'm subpoenaed by a court, I kind of have to. If I hear about any abuse of children or elderly, I'm a mandated reporter on something like that.
Sure.
The other reasons are if I need to consult with the supervisor specifically.
Okay.
And then, of course, if I hear like you want to harm yourself or harm others, we'll
Sure.
talk about it, of course, and kind of go from there based on what I report.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if for some other reason any of the questions you're not comfortable with, you don't have to worry about answering them. That's fine with me. I'm not too picky. I can move on.
Sure.
But other than that, we're gonna go ahead and just get going and just see what we can get into. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So basically, what I wanted to start first with is law enforcement.
Okay.
Have you ever had any good or bad experiences with law enforcement or anything like that?
Personally, mostly good. I've been in a couple like car accidents, and so just like had to call 911 and have them come over and make sure that I was okay and kind of handle anything that nothing. It never involved someone outside of me. So it was more just making sure that I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know it's not exactly law enforcement, but I also like law enforcement. I'm kind of like hesitant with because I also know that they're like not always great about how they treat people. But like firemen, I'm like 100% like fangirl because they like our garage burned down this one time.
Yeah.
Everyone was fine, but like they kicked butt, and so we'll like bake them pies on holidays and like take it to them because they're like pretty close to our house. So yeah.
That's awesome. So you've had pretty decent experiences, nothing
Yeah.
real
Pretty good.
traumatic or anything like
No,
that.
not for me.
Just typical
Yeah.
experiences.
But
Okay.
I also know like my boyfriend is Hispanic and we've had to really like talk through like we were just walking in the park one day and I could like kind of feel him tense up next to me and I was like, what's wrong? And he's like, just like be cool. There's like a police officer over there. And I was like, okay. So like it's just a police officer,
yeah.
but he was like, no, like you don't understand. And so we just talked a lot about like the experiences that he's had and like just really recognizing that there are really negative experiences for some people and that's reality. So.
Yeah. Was it really shocking for you to hear what he has had to go through being from a different culture?
I wouldn't say shocking necessarily. It was more just that it like brought it into real life because like you can watch movies and like hear stuff on the news and like you know that that's real, especially for minority communities. But like having him be like, no, legitimately, like I cannot be comfortable in the presence of law enforcement was just like recognizing how real it was for him and for everyone else.
Kind of like when you see a celebrity in person for the first time, you don't really think they're real until it's right there in front of you.
Exactly.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Now, with your family, with where you live, do you actually still live in the same community where you grew up?
No, not exactly. So right now I'm studying in Joplin at Missouri Southern State University, but I grew up my house is in Platte City, Missouri.
Okay.
But I was homeschooled, and so like I grew up in Platte City, but like I don't know anything about the town because I didn't go to the school or to the high school. You know, like we went there for groceries, and so most of my community was like Gladstone, Missouri, which is kind of like a North Kansas City like suburb, and then like Kansas City, like. I love Kansas City. That's where so many of my friends are, and just like a lot of my like high school was spent there, and I worked there over the summer of my freshman year of college, and just a lot of great experiences there. But so I'm in Joplin, but still go home for breaks and things like that. So.
Okay. And you said you had pretty much grown up there because you were homeschooled as well. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, is there anything like about your community where you grew up that you would change or try to make better?
Good question. Not necessarily.
Maybe more something that you think would help improve your community.
I mean, I really don't know, like, because like Platte City, I don't know too much about it. There's a lot to improve about Kansas City, but there's a lot of good there too,
Right.
So I don't think anything that I could say. There's a part of me that kind of wishes we'd been a little more involved in Platte City, just because like I don't know anything about the town, and people that know Platte City will be like, oh, like, how did you like the high school? And I'm like, I took an ACT test there once. Like, other than that, I don't know. So part of me wishes that there was more of a community from there.
Right. So in a way, it kind of you almost feel like you're not part of the actual community. You just kind of live there.
Exactly, and we're like outside the city limits, like not. Like our address says Platte City, but we're not in like the city. We're just a little bit outside and have like a couple acres. So.
Okay. So you kind of didn't. You were kind of out on your guys' own and everything. Okay. So obviously we're speaking English right now.
Yeah.
So is your primary language is English?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does your family at all speak any other language at home?
Not direct family. My dad's side is Croatian, and so he didn't necessarily grow up speaking Croatian, but some of his like aunts and uncles definitely did, and he grew up like in a Croatian community in Kansas City, and so just he doesn't speak it, but was also surrounded by Croatian and just people speaking it, and the newspaper was printed in Croatian, and all of their like restaurants had Croatian menus, and stuff like that.
Did you get a chance to experience any of that growing up?
A little bit. So the Croatian community is called Strawberry Hill in Kansas City, and so there's like a festival every summer in like June, kind of. That's just like a huge like they'll have like traditional musicians and like traditional dress and like really like traditional foods and stuff, and then also like really weird things that I'm like I think they're just doing that for a laugh. Like they'll have you can buy lemonade, but you buy it in a baby bottle. And you drink it out of the baby bottle, and it's like it's there every year. I don't know whose idea it was, and it's like legit the coolest thing. Like all the high schoolers are all over it. It's not like
and
the
they're
thing
all drinking
that
out
you
of bottles.
exactly. They all drink out of baby bottles. I don't think it has anything to do with Croatian culture. I think it just is there for whatever reason.
Maybe to attract more.
Yeah, I think
for
it's
just the antics of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That sounds like it would have been fun.
It was pretty
to
cool.
experience a different culture.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you actually did get to experience more
a
than
little
just.
bit. It was kind of more because we really did a lot of it for my grandma when she was alive, my dad's mom, and just like to make sure that she was still connected with that community and she had so many friends there. And so we just did it when we could. She was also pretty like fragile, especially the older that she got. Like she used a walker for most of the time that I knew her. And so it was also kind of hard to go to like festivals and things like that. But we would try to do something at least twice a year. There'd be like a Mother's Day celebration or their summer fest or something like that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Now kind of not really tying into that, but with the health beliefs in your family, when someone in your family would become sick, what would you guys do to help them? How did you guys go to the doctors?
It just depended on what it looked like. I think my mom especially was pretty cautious with doctors. And it just depended on what it was. Like she didn't mind going to like Walmart and picking up over the counter. Like that stuff was super common, and we knew like especially once we got older, if we got a headache, like we could just go and get ibuprofen from the counter, and it was totally fine. We could take cough drops on our own, like little things. If it was anything that wasn't over the counter, she was pretty cautious. But I think it might have also just been mainly a financial thing.
Right.
Because it's pretty expensive to go to the doctor. And like I came from a big family, like there's 8 of us. And so it's really expensive. I know like we all got strep one year, and so we all had to go to the doctor and get like the antibiotics for it, or not the antibiotics. What's that? Is it antibiotics?
I
for
think
strep?
so.
Okay.
Possibly.
Um,
Either
It's
like
fine.
antiviral, antibiotic.
yeah,
whatever it
yeah,
is.
one of the two.
Mhm.
But so like we went to the doctor for things like that, but I think financially it was just as few times as possible
Mhm.
was ideal. You know.
With you being an adult now, do you still treat your health the same way as you did, or as how you were supposed to treat it when you were a kid?
I definitely like still play the financial side of it.
Yeah.
Like I don't pay for my own doctor. My
Mhm.
parents pay for it. I'm under their insurance. And so if I need to go, I will always text them and be like, hey, like I think I should go to the doctor for this. What do you think or whatever? And usually it's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. If it's something that I think is important, they'll kind of support me in that. And then there's also like the clinic on campus, so like I'll go there if I need any over the counter meds. Like I pick up band-aids from them all the time. Like, hey, I cut myself. Can I have a like I got a paper cut or whatever. So that's pretty common. I do really like essential oils, but I use it more for like really simple things. Like I don't like having to take ibuprofen all the time.
Right.
So if I get a headache, I'll just use like a peppermint oil or something like that. But it's not. I recognize that it is not a cure-all or anything.
Right.
There's a limit, very much so.
Okay. So you don't stick to just holistic care. You kind of,
No.
if you really do need something,
Yeah.
you go.
And
holistic.
even like peppermint oil is pretty solid for headaches, but like if I have really bad cramps and the peppermint oil is not cutting it, I'm gonna take some ibuprofen. Like.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense because it just doesn't make sense to be in pain when you can actually fix it. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Now, let's see. We talked about the healthcare. Now, within your family, have you experienced any big or important events, like any trauma or crisis that you guys had to deal with growing up?
Yeah. I think I mean, it's kind of a big question, so I'm piecing things together, which is fine. My grandma, my dad's mom, I don't think I remember her ever not living with us. At some point in my early childhood, she just got to a point where she couldn't live on her own anymore and was still like pretty independent. And so my parents actually like made kind of a little apartment in the house, and so it had like a full kitchen and a bathroom and a bedroom and a little living room and just a space for her to live and be independent, but where we could check in on her and make sure that she was doing okay. And so like when I was growing up, that was awesome because my grandma was right next door and I could go over for sandwiches and cookies and all that things and just like sit down in front of the TV whenever I wanted. It was great. But once she got older, things just got really a lot more serious and especially like with my mom working from the house and my dad working out of like full time out of the house. There were definitely times when I was in high school where like I would go in and like change the batteries in her hearing aids or like help get her dressed for church in the morning or just little things, like she had this like really like white fluffy hair that like I had to like pick out with a comb for Sunday mass because she only slept on one side of her head, so it would like push down, She's such a cute old lady. And then eventually we had to move her into it wasn't a nursing home, it was just one house where a couple other elderly people were living, and then there was like a nurse on call all the time. And that was really hard. It just things got really, really serious at that point, and she just kind of slowly started getting weaker and weaker until she passed eventually. And yeah, so it wasn't traumatic for me, but I know it was really hard on my parents just to try to determine the best thing to do for her and the best way to care for her, and hating that they had to take her out of the home because then it's so much harder to spend time with her. And yeah, so that was hard for the family.
So you kind of answered the next question here is how your family responded to crisis.
Yeah.
It seems like you guys handled it the best you could.
I think so. I think it's pretty much a group effort. A lot of my siblings at that time lived out of the state or were going to college. And so it was kind of hard for the family to band together, but even like smaller things, like when I totaled my car, it was like I called 911 first, and then immediately just started calling my parents and my siblings and whoever picked up first, kind of thing. And my brother picked up first, and he was like, "Okay, like call mom again. If you can't reach her, I'll come and get you." And it was like 3 hours away from Kansas City, but everyone was kind of ready to jump in, and so I think it's just kind of a group effort of like, okay, like there's enough of us that will always like be able to cover whatever it is.
That's one of the things I like about families is in moments of crisis, you guys be band together, which
Very
is
much.
nice to have.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's see here. Now, with your religious beliefs, I don't think I heard much about that. How would you describe what your family's religion is
Sure.
or spirituality?
So I was raised Catholic and still practice Catholicism on my own. It came largely from my dad's side, and it's partly I don't mean to like belittle their faith, but for a lot of Croatians, it's very cultural, and so it's kind of natural. Like my grandma grew up Catholic, my dad grew up Catholic. Like it would have been crazy for him to like walk away from that. And then my mom married him and converted to that faith, and just chose that. And then we were all raised Catholic for the most part. So there is like a very like cultural aspect and like this is how it's always been aspect. But for some of us now there is like there definitely came a turning point for every kid when you turn 18 you kind of get to decide where you go from there. And so like maybe about half or a little less than half of the kids kind of just said like this isn't for me anymore, and then the other half of us just chose to like really make that something personal for ourselves, and it may look different. Like the way that I live my faith looks different than the way that my parents live their faith. But so just kind of choosing to make it my own now.
So you're not following what you kind of grew up with. You developed into your own.
I
Of what you
wouldn't
believe.
say exactly. It's more like there are certain things like within the faith that kind of like hold true no matter where you go with it, but there are more like subjective things or like gray areas where it's like, hey, like I don't think that's how it was meant to be translated, like modesty is a really like interesting discussion, and a lot of people will be like, you have to cover your knees or you have to like this skirt has to touch your knees or whatever, and it's like I don't think that's exactly like the matter between heaven and hell, but okay, so just kind of working through some of those things.
Does it cause any issues between what you have taken on for yourself religiously compared to what your family still practices?
Especially in high school when, I think most kids in high school kind of start to get an opinion of their own. So especially like when I hit high school, there were a lot of questions of like, why can't I wear that? Why can't I watch that? Why can't I do this? Whatever. And so just like working through that. Once I got to college and started making my own decisions, they did kind of like come to terms a little bit with like, okay, like she's an adult, we can't tell her what to do anymore, like, and just trying to like recognize that the best way to be a family still was just to keep the peace and just accept, like just accept that I'm still gonna come home whenever I can, and that's good enough right now,
That's good that you can still have your independence without it jeopardizing the relationship with your family as well.
Absolutely.
That's always something nice to have when you're getting older.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever felt that you were treated differently in regards to like your race or your culture or anything?
No. I mean, I would identify as white, and I don't think I've really experienced anything like discrimination or anything because of that. I would say within my family, sometimes within like, it's not a Catholic thing, but just people within my church or other like Christians will look at you differently because you're a woman, or treat you, like modesty is an issue that mostly goes towards women, and so it's just like one of those conversations of like, how is this fair? Like, how are you being fair right now?
Challenging the gender.
Exactly.
Issue.
Yeah. So more along those lines, but nothing like racially.
Okay. Now, with the fact that you mentioned you were homeschooled, what age did you really start noticing that there were other races and cultures out there besides your families?
I ran track for 8 years with like a private track team. They were super open to just letting like homeschoolers come in. It was like a private Christian school, and then they just said like, if you guys want to come and run track with us for free, and so we did. And I think that was like I was pretty little, like when I started. I was probably 8 or 9 when I started running track, and of course, like it's not serious, you know. You just go to hang out with your friends and get a good workout. But there were, like I especially remember a specific family that was African American, and I think at that time they were one of the few like African American families that I knew at that age. And then my coach for track was also married to an African American woman, and like they had kids that had totally different skin colors. You know, like they had one kid that was completely white and then kind of like a variance of shades for their children. And so it's just interesting. Like I remember having a conversation with their daughter, who like her and I were pretty close in age, so we just got to be good friends. And then like there was one time where we were talking, and I don't know if I said the word black, but she kind of like stopped me and was like, I really don't like being called black, like because people just are mean about it. And I was like, I'm sorry, like, you know, I'll try, you know, I won't use it. That's okay, you know. So I think just around 8, 9, 10 was kind of when that started. Like I started to realize that like everyone can have a different color of skin, and everyone can have a different like childhood, and everyone can have a different culture, and yeah, just kind of getting used to the differences between people.
Right. Yeah. If you only grow up around certain people all your life, it's different when you start seeing people of different colors.
Yeah.
It's not a shock. It's more, what is? I
Yeah.
don't understand what's going on.
Just a lot of curiosity.
Right. You know, going more on like the, you know, discrimination, bias, and all that.
Sure.
Have you ever been labeled in your life that you know of?
I mean, like I would say like I've been labeled as a woman, which is like fine. I identify as a woman, but then that carries a lot of other labels with it. You know, it means that you're not as academic, maybe, or that you have to look or dress or act a certain way. So just kind of fighting against those stereotypes more.
Does that really kind of change your perspective about yourself when you feel like you're being labeled?
Yeah, it's definitely it makes you like take a step back and like double check yourself to make sure that like, wait, am I that? Like, you know, like, am I that person that they think I am? But then it's also like, I'm gonna prove them wrong. Like, you know, it's definitely like a double hitter. It's just like, nope, I'm not, and I'm gonna make sure that they see it.
Right. So like being labeled can kind of, it depends on the person. It can go either in a positive way or in a negative way, depending on how you react to it.
I think so.
You kind of talked about a little bit about education with your family, because you were homeschooled quite a bit there. What kind of expectations did your family have for you after you finished high school?
Yeah, I think there was definitely, I wouldn't, in like, as a family as a whole, there's not really a pressure to go to college or not to go to college. I think at the point of like graduation from high school, it really depended on that kid. So like I got a lot of pressure to apply to colleges and like go for the scholarships and do everything I could, because I was like really academic as a kid and got really good grades in high school, and so it was like natural that I would keep going, and like I wanted to go to college, and so it was just like, okay, like we're gonna find you the best opportunity possible. But like one of my brothers like just worked full time and was doing totally fine, and so there was really no pressure for him to go to college because he was okay and didn't need to pursue anything else.
So your parents kind of just let each of the kids kind of decide on their own, and after that, that's when they gave the support that they needed.
I think so.
That's nice. Okay. So you don't feel pressured at all to continue with your education or anything?
I think for me, if I said like, no, I don't want to go to college, there totally would have been pressure there because it's like,
Right.
what's wrong? Like you've done well in school, like what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
But I did want to continue, and so there wasn't a necessity for pressure there.
Okay. Now talking about the structure of your family here, who would you really define as the leader of your family?
My dad.
Your dad?
Yeah,
Okay.
kind of like there are some things that they do really, really well where like my mom and my dad will balance the roles and balance like who leads and who kind of sits back and things like that. But there are other times where it's like kind of really obvious that my mom is taking a more like passive role, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of depends.
So does he pretty much make up the rules, or they kind of do it together?
So their rule, which personally I don't agree with, but their rule is that they will never disagree in front of the kids.
Okay.
And so when you're little, I can see that being like really beneficial for like little kids, because then like you don't see any like bad or anything, and I think that can be important for little guys, you know. But once you start growing up and you start trying to make your own decisions, I think that got really rough because it meant that my parents, like, if my dad would say something, my mom could disagree, but wouldn't say anything in that moment. She would like wait until they were alone and they would talk it out, and then they'd come back and be like, hey, like, we talked about it, here's what we actually think. And so there was like really good communication between them, and like they did compromise, but we never saw any of it and didn't necessarily know that it was going on until like you could look back several months later and be like, oh, like that was because mom talked to him or whatever, you know. So it was good and bad, and yeah, so just kind of stuff happens.
So that's good. They didn't do disagreements in front of you guys, so you didn't have to see any issues in their marriage.
Yeah, I think that was their goal. It made it hard because then, like, when I got to high school, like, I thought that they both believed the same thing, and then I realized that, like, my mom actually had very different views, and I realized that I'd been fighting her the whole time when I didn't mean to be, and it wasn't that issue at all. So it just depends.
Okay. Now, you going more off of those rules that your parents had come up with together, you know, when something like a rule got broken, like you stayed out too late or something like that, who would dole out the consequences?
It depended on the rule, honestly. It very much like, so because I was homeschooled, my mom, in quotes, was the teacher. I don't mean to minimize her role because she absolutely was the teacher, but like she doesn't have an official title, right? So like she was the teacher, my dad was the principal, but it really depended on like not every kid goes to the principal's office in school, right? And so like my mom as a teacher most of the time would be the one that said like you're grounded or whatever. But then if there was something bigger, it was like, okay, go to the principal's office. And they never like, it wasn't meant to play like that, but that's kind of what it was, you know?
That's interesting.
Yeah. Coming home late, as far as curfew, they were pretty flexible with curfew. Like, it was just kind of like, how late are you going to be out? Who are you with? Like, are you safe? Whatever. And especially, like, if I was going out with one of my older brothers, it was like, okay, like, you can stay out later, they'll bring you home. It was always, when you get home at whatever time, you have to go and knock on their bedroom door and just say, like, hey, I'm home. And they would always say, like, okay. And then if you missed curfew, if you're late and you knock on the door, they'll say, like, okay, good night, whatever. And then in the morning, they'll be like, so you were late. What happened there? And it's just, like, a conversation and like, don't do it again, like, that kind of thing. So.
Okay. I like how that's kind of interesting how they did that. That's really nice. Now, you had a pretty large family that you had talked about. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Yeah, I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters.
Okay. With in regards to rules, because there is so many kids in your family, were there different rules for each of the kids too?
And they probably wouldn't like when we were growing up, they didn't like to admit to it, but
Right.
like my sister's experience. So my two older sisters, my eldest sister is like 35, and the sister's 33, and then there was like a 5-year gap, and so
Okay.
those sisters grew up on a totally different like parenting methods than we did. Yeah, and then like you get to the rest of the kids and all of us, and like those sisters, also weren't homeschooled until like 5th and 8th grade or something like that. And then starting with my brother after that, everyone was homeschooled throughout school. And so it's just like seeing kind of a shift in like their approaches and whatever. So
You feel like they kind of got stricter in their rules?
it just depended on the rule you were talking about.
Okay.
Like for whatever reason, my sister like tangibly remembers not being allowed to eat cake or drink soda when she was little.
Okay.
They definitely didn't hold that rule when we grew up. But
Right.
then like as far as like what movies we could watch, that probably got like more strict for things like that.
Okay. So that's interesting. How such a large family with so many different
Yeah.
rules going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things.
But I think that pretty much I think finishes it up for me.
Sure.
Did you maybe have any other questions or anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm good.
No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing with
Yeah.
me. It was great learning more about you, and hopefully we get to do it again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam.
You're welcome.